Uh, when there's something you want to achieve, improve marriage, improve job performance, uh, improve motivation, find yourself a good people can live an entire life trying to communicate like that, and the result of that is misery. Was that the person who was complaining about the others cheating was saying under certain circumstances, I would cheat.
Jonathan, tell me a little bit about how transactional analysis actually works.
Well, sure. Safety. As that feeling of safety increases, you'll get to watch out what you fear. Grief is the price of love. The guess is the things that bother you most about you are areas where you've not had a real good bond.
How can couples feel or rebuild trust after it's been broken?
The answer to that is,
Well, good afternoon, Dr. Walker. Thanks for being here with us today.
happy to be here.
And well, the topic is relationships today. And as you know, when you have two or more people together, you're going to have problems with communication. You're going to have problems with relationships. I think we both know that.
Absolutely.
How long have you been a psychologist?
I have been a psychologist for about 54 years, somewhere there, about 54.
What kind of roles have you played as a psychologist? Clinical, forensic, counseling, what kind of stuff?
Well, to answer that question is going to be a little bit complicated, because actually I started my practice before there was any sort of licensure law. However, there was the Texas Education Agency had a licensure within the agency for school psychologists, and I was a school psychologist that did not have a legal license like we now have. So I did that for a time and maintained that license as long as it was good, and then became a licensed psychologist when such was possible.
Okay.
So I've been doing it for a long time.
I know marriage and communication or relationships have been a particular interest to you and over the years. And this kind of leads us into our next topic. Effective communication is critical in relationships. And why do partners often miscommunicate? And what are some easy fixes for that?
Well, that's an interesting question. And I think the answer to that is legion. I think there are many, many, many reasons. Unfortunately, when people are not communicating well, some really are never stop long enough to think about the fact that communication is where things have gone wrong. They may have had a lifestyle of poor communication. It's likely that they were reared in families where the parent figures did not communicate well with one another or did not communicate well with the children. So I think it's a sort of a learned process, and I think it's so intrinsic in families where poor communication is part of the milieu, that oftentimes the persons involved are not, they just think that's the way the world is, and are really unaware that they know that the communication they have is unsatisfactory, but they assume that's the way the world is, because sometimes that poor communication extends beyond the marital situation and is in their life in general, like with relationships at work, relationships with peers, other types of relationships, maybe when they were younger with teachers and other authority figures. So I think the answer to your question is sort of legion, many, many contributors to poor communication.
Okay. And trust is often considered the foundation of any strong relationship. Without trust, it is difficult to build intimacy and feel secure. How can couples feel or rebuild trust after it's been broken?
Well, That is a very important question. I will come down on the positive side of that. I believe that can happen, but I do not think it happens instantaneously. I think it takes a long period of time, and I think how shall I say, it requires a person learning to trust themselves and their evaluation of a situation. And as long as there's a lot of self-doubt, I'm not sure I really trust myself to know whether to trust this other person or not, or I might think everything's okay, I might misperceive. All of that figures into this, I think. So I think learning to trust implies, is there implicit in that is learning to trust one's own judgment and intuition, as well as learning to trust the other person. In other words, trust their assessment of the other person.
Do you think there are times where it's never rebuilt and they just never learn to trust again?
I think some people do not. Hopefully, with positive experiences, and that part of that may be counseling, a person can learn to do that. Can learn to trust.
So if they never trust each other again, is the relationship over at that point, do you think?
I think there are people who maintain a semblance of relationship where there's very little trust. And one of the things that I think is likely true in many situations where trust has been broken is the result of the old adage, once burned, twice marked. I think if trust is broken and work is done to try to rebuild trust, I think that it needs to be understood by both parties to be a very fragile kind of thing. And long-term positive experience with no additional breaches of trust, I think, can work together often to build a reasonable measure of trust.
How important is trust in a relationship?
Well, I think it's extremely important, but it's not just trusting the other person, it's trusting yourself to accurately make assessments and judgments about the other person and their ability to live up to trust expectations.
And what steps can they take to manage their own insecurities in that relationship?
I think, again, the answer there is legion. I suppose that when you work with people who are dealing with trust issues, you're dealing with other issues such as self-esteem, self-assessment, and all that sort of thing. And persons can sort of be all over the board with regard to those issues. And I think that learning, again, to trust yourself and your judgment about matters, having experiences where you have verified to yourself that your perception is accurate, and knowing to trust yourself and your assessment is really important in building healthy trust in anyone else. If you don't trust yourself, you probably are going to project that distrust on other people. If I'm untrustworthy, or if I feel like I can't trust myself, I'm probably going to have great difficulty trusting anybody else because there will be a boundary issue. I will assume our basic assumption is it starts with ourselves.
So if I'm out cheating, I'm going to really think you're doing the same thing.
That's exactly right. I have seen people who thought their mate was cheating on them, And after talking to both parties, I really thought the likelihood of that was remote. But I think what was actually being told me by them was that the person who was complaining about the others cheating was saying under certain circumstances, I would cheat.
So it starts, with their own self. It's a reflection of themselves
Absolutely.
a lot of times.
Absolutely.
Understanding and meeting your partner's emotional needs is vital in a relationship because it makes them feel valued and understood. How can I better understand and meet my partner's emotional needs and communicate my own?
I think the basic issue is in understanding another person has to do with communication with that person, mutual communication, which comes out of safety. If there is there used to be an old axiom that we used in counseling, and that axiom was the necessary and sufficient condition for openness is safety. And when there is a feeling of real safety, absence of threat, and far more than just absence of threat, a feeling of safety. As that feeling of safety increases, the occurrence, in my judgment, of openness is increased dramatically. And when there is that sense of openness, mutual openness, increases understanding, no question about that. And oftentimes it also has the positive effect of increasing not only the quantity of information, but it actually increases the ability of a person to get into their own psyche and be able to say out loud things they may not have even been able to say to themselves. In other words, self-understanding comes out of openness to other people or a relationship where there is openness. Openness is a product of safety and also a process that engenders additional self-understanding and understanding of others.
Handling conflicts well in a relationship is crucial to avoid misunderstandings and build respect and understanding between partners. What are some effective ways to manage and resolve conflicts in a relationship without causing further long-term damage?
That question or comment question actually has many sides to it, and most of us have our own language. If I am going to communicate with another party, I have to speak a language they can hear. If I'm going to be able to really hear another person, they're going to have to speak a language I can hear. And there are many languages within any one language. You say, well, we both speak English. Well, that goes way beyond that.
Yeah.
When you know someone fairly well, one of the things I would hope that you would come to understand is how do they best hear various subjects, and use terminology that does not throw up red flags to them, and terminology that they can hear as coming from a person who is trying to understand, not trying to judge. And I think that there's a lot of difference in various individuals about the kind of language they can hear and appropriately respond to. I don't know whether that answers your question or not, but I think that's at least part of the thing I would look for.
I remember one time there was a counseling session you were telling me a little bit about. And the way you help them is you had was it a green hat or something? I'm trying to remember how that went. But the couple had some problems with spacing or distance, and you had him put on a certain kind of hat
Right.
to let the partner know he just needed space. He wasn't upset. I think the way it went was they would create conflict just to get space, and I believe you said put on a hat.
Well, I
something
recall
like
that I recall that very well. That was not original with me. I read that somewhere about a counselor, psychologist working with a couple, and unfortunately, very few of us had parents who knew how to directly ask for distance. I sometimes tease the folks I'm working with and tell them that we all have a DQ. And I say, now I'm not talking about Dairy Queen. I'm talking about distance quotient. And sometimes when that distance quotient, when there's differences in that, one of the parties is viewed as wanting more distance. And when that happens, that person is perceived by their mate to be farther and farther and farther remote from them, and the other person perceives themselves as pursuing, or at least they do feel they are pursuing, but the other person is keeping the distance by running away from them. Mm-hmm. And the illustration that I had heard was a couple who learned to ask for distance, just straight out, and they said that they weren't very comfortable talking about it, so they agreed. She agreed. She had an old shawl that had been given to her at some point in her life, and she said, honey, when this shawl is around my neck, it doesn't mean I don't love you anymore. It just means I just need some distance. And it won't be forever, but just kind of let me be out of reach for a little bit. And he said, well, I'll certainly do that. And she said, what kind of signal can you give me? And he said, you know that crazy hat I have in the closet over there? I never wear it, but I'll put that on when I'm needing distance. And that doesn't mean I don't love you, but when it's on, I'm just in a funk and don't feel like talking. And when I take it off, I'm ready to communicate again. And they used those procedures, and it seemed to work well for them. And they learned to do something that most people don't learn to do. They learn how to ask for distance. Now, everybody knows how to get distance.
Yeah.
And lots of fights would be prevented if persons had learned to ask for distance, because the result of a fight often is distance. Yeah. So, and it's okay to need distance. Distance is a part of a person's experience. There are times when preoccupations, when difficulties arise, when uncertainties arise, and a person just may need some time to themselves. And to learn to ask for that, rather than setting up some negative event to create it, and then be able to blame the other person for the distance. Yeah. That's not good. No. That's not good. But let me tell you, it happens, and it happens frequently.
Managing long-term relationships is important, as it provides emotional stability, deepens mutual understanding, and builds a lasting bond. What are the golden rules for happiness or for long-term lasting relationships?
What shall I say? I'm going to begin a ways back from that. Okay. I think there are a lot of I'm going to use the word script issues. A book was written many years ago called Scripts People Live, written by a German. And that's, to me, been an extremely important book that I have referred many people to. It's not an easy book to read, it has depth to it. But many people, without being aware of it, learn certain types of relationship scripts. um, if a person is reared in a marriage, pardon me, if a person is reared in a family where the parents have been married several times and they have known parent, step-parent, step-family, all that sort of thing, sometimes they find themselves, when they're married, at certain points in that marriage, feeling unsure about the continuation of the marriage, uncertain about, will this last? I've even had people before say, I don't know what's wrong with me. And I would say, what do you mean? They would say, well, my husband and I, or my wife and I, have been doing very well, and I think it's about over. And I would ask the question, after we visited for a while, did your parents have trouble with their marriage? Well, yeah, mom and dad got a divorce. How were you? Well, I was 14 years old. How long had they been married? Well, they've been married, let's see, I guess 20 years. How long have you and your husband been married? Well, we got married, I said, well, 21 years. Do you have a daughter? And I was talking to the lady. Yes. How old is your daughter? Well, my daughter's about, she just turned 14. And I say, are you aware of what you're telling me? Well, I've just told you about my family. I said, no, you've told me that you're having uncertainty about the continuation of your marriage when your daughter became the same age you were when your parents divorced. And when you reached the age your mom reached when your mom and dad got a divorce. And it's almost predictable that a certain, at least, feeling of uncertainty about the future of this relationship would come about. You think that has anything to do with it? No, I know that has something to do with it. Oftentimes when persons reach the age their same-sex parent died, they begin to have health concerns. And often health concerns about whatever the private heart, if the parent died of a heart attack, same-sex parent died of a heart attack, they begin to think they're having problems with their heart. Those kind of things, those kinds of script issues, and there are multitudes of those, can have an effect on that.
So you're saying that everything that happens in our life, we think that's just the way it is. We build a script from every component or every experience we have, and we think that's just a universal script for the way it ought to be.
Oftentimes we do, and I will tell you that operates outside of direct vision. That's peripheral, and most often people are totally unaware of the influence of those kinds of things on what is out here in front. They are influenced by that, but they're totally unaware of the influence of those kind of things. And I think it's important. I think there are other issues, but that's just one illustration of what can affect the sense of a really long-term relationship.
So when you're in therapy and a client says, "Wow, that's interesting," what effect can that have? Just knowing that script actually exists. What just knowing it, can that make a change?
Well, I think what Steiner, the guy that wrote the book Scripts People Live, I think what he would say is scripts, first of all, it's very typical for people to develop scripts. Not all do. And these scripts could be about many different things: jobs, relationships with other workers, other students, if you're in school. Scripts about many different things. But if you have developed a script and you have this recurrent problem that may be related to a script, you probably will continue to have that problem until you recognize that you're dealing with a script. And once you recognize you're dealing with that, then you can cut that off when it first begins rather than allowing it to fester, and know where it comes from and know how to work with it.
So it could be anything: how you raise your children,
how to raise your
marriage,
children, how much
your-
money do you make, how do you manage your money, how much do you complain, how open are you to be self-aware, how empathic can you be in terms of feeling somebody else's pain. All of those could have to do with script.
So we just watch our parents grow up. We create a script for almost everything. And then we start acting that out subconsciously.
That's right.
And we just think that's normal.
Right.
That's the way it ought to be.
Or we can have an anti-script.
Okay.
There can be some things about our rearing that we detest so badly that we go in the opposite direction so far that we are a detriment to our own happiness.
Okay. So sometimes we go against it so much that creates a problem as well.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
too much scripting can be a problem, and too much anti-scripting can be a problem.
Absolutely.
So
Anti-script becomes a script.
Yeah. Okay. And now this one's, I guess, a little bit about some of what we just talked about. Understanding patterns in a relationship is critical to finding effective solutions and preventing repeated issues. Can you explain some common patterns you've observed in couples in facing relationship difficulties? How do these patterns change over time?
Well, like I say, the why and how patterns develop is a very complicated kind of thing. That's the reason it's oftentimes helpful to talk with someone who can be far enough outside the situation to help identify what's going on. But
Can you think of one that maybe that you've ran into that?
right, I immediately go to characteristics of poor communication patterns, because I think the poor communication patterns often develop patterns in relationships that are very, very destructive. And I'll get technical for just a moment. The technical basis from which I usually work on communications comes out of a thing called transactional analysis, which sounds sort of highfalutin, but TA, transactional analysis, is basically it basically is set up in such a way that it meets two really good criteria. Number one, it's simplistic in the sense that you can understand the basics of it easily and learn that quickly. But it is complex enough that if you want to take it and really work with it, you can take it a very long way in terms of improving communication. And improved communication is what therapy is all about, really. And that process can foil the impetus for poor patterns developing, and if they have developed, that process can undo that. I have been remarkably moved by changes that I have seen. Well, I had a guy come in not long ago and said, I said, why are you here? He said, well, a couple of my friends said you saved their marriage. Well, I said, first of all, I didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
If their marriage was about to be gone, I don't know who you're talking about, but if their marriage was about gone and is saved, they're the ones that saved it. You tell him he and she get credit for their marriage being saved. I never found out for sure, but I'm reasonably sure what he was talking about probably was some couple that we had worked with on communication. Because the transactional analysis schema of understanding communication can really dramatically change the bad feelings that sometimes occur when people try to talk to each other. And there are couples, there are families that have extremely negative communication patterns, and they know it always when a serious communication interaction occurs. They know it always feels bad when they leave, but the next time when another comes up, it'll be the same thing. Each will be upset or angry or hurt and go away and not learn from that how it is you change all that
So
stuff.
tell me a little bit about how transactional analysis actually works.
Sure.
What is it? What does it mean? What is it?
Be happy to do it. The person that came up with this wisely chose some really simple words, and what he is talking about is how any communication occurs. This could be parent to child, this can be husband to wife, wife to husband, boss to employee, employee to boss, fellow worker to fellow worker. He says that every time we communicate, we're coming from one of three, what he calls ego states. Don't let that word worry you. And we are addressing one of these three ego states in the other person. What are these three ego states? Okay. First, and on this imaginary piece of paper, write down the word parent. Second, middle of the page, write down this word adult. Third, near the bottom of the page, write down this word child. Now let me define those. Parent, one at the top, does two things. It makes judgments and it gives commands. If I'm in parent mode, I'm making a judgment or I'm giving a command. Now there are two types of parent. There's a critical parent, there's a nurturing parent. Critical parent. Can't you ever learn to do that right? That's a critical parent remark. Nurturing parent remark. You certainly look nice today. I love that new shirt you're wearing. It really does make you look good. Yeah. Okay. Adult. Adult is a fact. It's a fact, just a fact. I'll give you an illustration. Critical parent. This room's too cold. Nurturing parent. Boy, the temperature is exactly right here. Adult. It's 74 degrees in this room, and that feels perfect. If 74 is what it is. Now, child. Child is where all the feelings lie. And there are three types of child. One child is, and each have two names. One child is called compliant child, and that's the part of us that tries to please. Or hurt child. I tried, but it didn't work. I couldn't do it good enough. That's compliant or hurt child. That's where a lot of depression is, by the way, reactive depression. The next child is angry or rebellious child. Critical parent. Stupid, can't you do ABC? Angry or rebellious child. Oh, ABC, I'll learn to do ABC. Well, you learn to do XYZ, you dummy. Conforming or hurt child, angry or rebellious child, or the third, and that's where you would like to be when you're in child, free child. Imagine if you're a couple, you're married, imagine if you enjoy the lake and you enjoy good music. Imagine sitting by a lakeside at sunset, water perfectly like a mirror, temperature absolutely perfect, and listening to really good music, whatever you define as good music, with the person you love. That is free child. You're not trying to please, you're not angry or rebellious, you're enjoying each other. That's what you want to get into. Now, this has gotten kind of complicated, like I said, but many people spend much of their communication either being in or receiving critical parent from their mate or giving that out to their mate. Both can be critical parent. Critical parent can relate to critical parent. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Or critical parent can relate to hurt child or compliant child. Fussing, trying to please, getting hurt, can't please. Most people are not aware that if you can get into hurt child or compliant child, you may hook the other party into getting into critical parent. But the critical parent, angry or hurt child, or angry or rebellious child, these three can interact with each other, and a person can spend a lifetime in miserable communication where that's the dominant kinds of interaction there may be. When there is a lot of nurturing parent, there can also be a lot of adult and a lot of free child. And when those three are interacting with each other, those three ego states. Number one, we're feeling good about ourselves because we're getting positive strokes from our significant other, from nurturing parent. Two, we're tending to business because the adult is in charge. And number three, we're having a very good time because there's a lot of free child, not trying to please, just enjoying being with each other.
Yeah. So when one takes on a role as a critical parent and one recipe for disaster in a relationship.
Absolutely. And those roles can become fixed almost in communication. People can live an entire life trying to communicate like that, and the result of that is misery.
And some of that goes back to maybe childhood where we talked about scripts. And maybe they learn that.
Absolutely.
In that script, and then realize they can get out of it. And we can use these with any relationship. We could a boss, a coworker, our children. We could get into parent child. We could reverse it with our children. We could be the child. They could be the parent.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
We could easily do that.
Absolutely. In fact, that's very important. There are some children that are put into roles they don't need to be put into that can be actually abusive of the children. But anyway, I realize we covered a lot of ground there. Mm-hmm. But if anyone is listening and would like more information about that, before you toss it away, get some additional information about it because it can really be a helpful way to get a hold of a schema that will help you understand and your mate understand what's going on communication-wise.
Yeah. Many people struggle with breakups due to emotional attachment, fear of change, and uncertainty about the future. How can I handle a breakup gracefully even when I still have strong feelings for that person?
Well, that question is fraught with a lot of emotion in the person who's experiencing that. How shall I say this? I think that if this is strong enough to be what I would call grief, grief is the price of love. That's the best statement I've ever read about grief. Where there's love and it's lost or appears to be lost, grief will occur. And grief that's the price you pay for having loved. And philosophically, you may be able to say with Shakespeare, it's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. Or you may be hurting so badly that you can say it would have been better never to have loved because the loss is too great. But if a person has, in fact, if you are feeling abandoned by another person, you can't fix that. you have to give that person permission to deal with that. I'm being simplistic when I say that. You may have to have some help to do that. It doesn't mean that it can't be fixed, but you cannot actively do anything to fix it. You can do things that will lessen the likelihood of it ever being fixed. But allowing the other person to have the problem, which is not easy to do, but allowing them, if they left, to have the problem, may be the first step in setting up the process that may give them understanding they didn't have before. If they leave because they're fussing, there's something they can't handle about you, that's a little bit different deal. But anyway, it's got to be their problem.
So there's no way to avoid the grief, in other words.
No.
So
no.
if you loved them or had strong feelings, you're going to grieve, and there's no way to shortcut this. You've got to grieve it, go through all those processes to get to the other side.
Right.
You can't just magic wand it away.
No. It's easy to say you've got to go on with your life, but you don't want to hear that. I'd suggest if that is your experience, I would suggest get some counseling, and you will be able to go on. It won't be easy, but you will be able to go on. Life does not have to end when the relationship ends.
Couples often grow apart due to differing interests, lack of communication, and evolving personal goals. So how can you grow as an individual without drifting away from your partner?
I'm going to sort of begin at the end and work backwards on that. I think that one of the greatest compliments that a mate can pay to their mate, one of the greatest things they can ever say to them that's a compliment is, honey, I want to tell you, and I want to thank you for helping me become more nearly the person I want to be. Or, I want to thank you for helping me reach the goal, or work toward reaching the goal that's really important to me. And I think it takes a really healthy relationship for each to have the kind of mature love for their mate that will help them reach or strive to help them become more nearly who they want to be or reach the goal that they want to reach.
Is there times where one partner works really hard to change the other partner, and once they do get them changed, they don't like the changes they made in them?
No question about that. No question about that. I have seen people who thought they wanted their partner more compliant. But if their partner became more compliant, they'd have no respect for them. And that person who has that paradoxical kind of thought process from the other the other person is really in a strait betwixt two. Mm-hmm. Whichever way they go, they lose.
Yeah, I've seen it where they finally did come to a compliant, and then the wife left them.
No question.
So they didn't. They thought they wanted it, but they didn't.
Right.
Or
Yeah. And there's another factor there. There's an old psychiatric dictum, and this is a close thing to what you're talking about. is I fear that my mate is going to do this or do this or become this or that. The old dictum is, watch out what you fear. You'll make it happen. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that old interpersonal axiom.
How do childhood experiences and family backgrounds influence one's approach to relationships as an adult? And how do we deal with that?
I didn't get the last part of the question.
How do we deal with how childhood influences and experiences and backgrounds affect our adult relationships? Excuse me.
I find myself wanting to smile and say, stop. How did you get where you are? Where are these ideas that you have? Where'd they come from? The goals that you have, where did they come from? Did they just pop into your head and into your mind? Heavens no. They came about as a result of the interactions you've had with primarily with your family of origin, but also with other people as well. You have been, and let me tell you, you have been affected. Let me say it another way. You recall many, many years ago when computers were programmed with punch cards. You remember that? Maybe too long ago for you. Well, what happened? The way programs were written, they were written to react to punch cards. Cards that punches were in there. And every time you made a comment and your parents smiled, that punched a card in a certain way. Every time you said a word and your parent grimaced, that punched a card. Every experience you've had has punched a card, and that's part of the program that you're operating from now. And you've got to be realistic about that. And when you are realistic about that, then you understand the way I view the world didn't just happen. It didn't just happen. It came about as a result of a process that I was in, and the places where I spent the most time, the people with whom I spent more time in the interactions, I got programmed in some kind of ways from them, and a lot of the things that I'm dealing with are the direct result of that. So you have learned. I think awareness of that causes everybody to stop and say, just a doggone minute, where'd this come from? That's a good place to stop and say, where did this come from? How did this happen? And give yourself a little time for that to sort of soak in. And you may be driving down the road and, son of a gun, I know where that came from.
Yeah. Or you might be a new parent and you're saying something to your child, and then you could think, wait a minute, is this me talking?
Right.
Or is this my parent talking?
Absolutely.
And sometimes you'll go, wait a minute, this isn't me, this is my parent. And then you go, I don't even need to be saying all this stuff.
Absolutely.
You know, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
I'm just going with these scripts. I'm just talking the way I think a new parent should be talking.
Absolutely.
And, you know, then you can change it.
Mm-hmm.
But without knowing that existed, what we just talked about, you can't change what you don't know.
No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. You are, this is simplistic, you are a child of your time. I'm a child of my time. A lot about the current culture I don't like. I can think that I'm above it, but I'm not. By the way, those of you who are really upset about some of our early leaders in this country, they were children of their time also. Remember that.
All right, that brings us into technology. Technology has transformed modern relationships by enabling constant connectivity, but also introducing new challenges in communication and intimacy. In what ways has technology impacted modern relationships, both positively and negatively?
Well, have we got 14 hours to talk? Not long ago, I was, maybe a year or so ago, I had my car out to get the oil changed. And I was sitting in a waiting room in an auto dealership where my oil was being changed in the car. And there were about 6 or 8 people there. I'm old, so most of them were younger than myself, but there were no really young people there. Everybody was beyond 30 years of age, most were beyond 40. And they were sitting around, and I it'd been the first time I'd been in a situation kind of like that in a long time, so I just observed for a little bit. Not one person spoke to another person. Instead, every person there, I didn't have mine out, but everybody else had their phone out, and they were busy punching their phone. As I said, not one person spoke to another person. They didn't know each other. They weren't interested in knowing each other. What were they doing? They were probably communicating using current technology, communicating to another person. And that reminded me of I believe he was Israeli, psychologist, who talks about 2 kinds of interaction. I-it interactions and I-thou interaction. I think that future historians will look back at our time and say, those people made a big mistake. They substituted I-it relationships for I-thou relationships. And Shostrom was the guy that came up with that. And I think that our society is going to pay a big price because children now are reared with far more experience in I-it relationships than in I-thou. And I think that's going to affect a lot of aspects of adult life. Principally, I think it's going to affect boundaries, and I think it's going to affect general judgment. What we call good sense, common sense. We're going to see a lot less of that, in my judgment, because of I-it relationships. I'm grateful that technology has brought us access to information. Unfortunately, a lot of the information we can have contact with is unreliable. But winners and losers.
Yeah, I noticed that you have your phone, just like I often have my phone on me, in case you need to get a hold of somebody.
Right.
So it's got us all, hasn't it? You know, as much as we've resisted over the years, nobody has been unscathed by this, have they?
I'll give you a very good illustration. When we started this interaction this afternoon, before we started it, I asked if this could be edited because I wouldn't leave my phone on because I may get an important call that I need to take. A century ago, I'd never thought to do anything like that.
I know this is off topic, but what was the very first car that you drove?
The very first car I ever drove, one of the first was a Model T. I should not have been driving. I was not old enough to drive, but the traffic in those days was very limited, and so my father would allow me to drive around the block.
And what was the very first type of telephone that you used?
First type of telephone I used was, it was prior to having a dial. There was no dial on the first one I used. It was just a telephone. When you picked up the receiver, operator said, "Number please," and you gave them a number. and then it either rang or it didn't ring or it gave a business signal, and you knew to hang up. So
Yeah, well, sorry to get us off topic there, but couples often seek therapy when they're struggling. How does individual therapy contribute to the success of couples therapy?
Say that last part of it.
How does individual, well, let me give you two parts to it. How does individual therapy contribute to success of couples therapy, and should partners undergo individual therapy in addition to couples therapy?
That's a tough question, because I think it has a lot to do with the couple. Oftentimes, the person who is most open to seek therapy is in all probability the one who needs it least. The one who may need it most, may be more resistant to it. I would say if it's a couple's problem, if you get both to get therapy together, I think that would be good. But if they do not want, if one refuses to go to therapy, I would encourage the other to get into therapy. It may bring to you awarenesses that you have not had about creating boundaries that will help you feel better about yourself and respect the other's boundary better, which may in fact be helpful to the situation.
So what if you have a couples therapy, but only one shows up and says, there's nothing wrong with me, but let me tell you about my partner's problems. So how do you deal with that?
If I had never seen them before and they'd never been in therapy before, I would view it differently than I would if somebody had had a history of therapy. If they had no history of therapy, I would probably be open to them saying, and spend the first maybe half of the session, trying to get them to talk about what it is they want to talk about. And then I would probably, around about midpoint of the session, say, what do you want from me? How can I help you? And I would be very, very, I would attempt to be very, very sensitive to what not only they said, but what their body language, facial language told me. And then make some decision about where I went from there.
Does that sort of thing happen very often?
That frank, being that frank
Mm-hmm.
and straightforward, that would be infrequent.
But they think that?
I'm sorry?
Do they think that often? Or
I think sometimes they think that, yes, they do. It's very often that people believe the whole problem lies in the other person. But in fact, I tell people sometimes when a couple comes to the office, I said, "You realize you had a solution to your problem before you came here," and they both look at me and, "No, I didn't." And I say, "Ah, yeah, you did." And they say, "Well, what do you think our solution to the problem is?" I say, "Well, I know what it is." And they say, "Well, what is it?" And I looked at the husband and I say, "Your solution to the problem is for her to change. And ma'am, your solution to the problem is for him to change." Mm-hmm. And they all agreed. You say, "You're right, but I don't think it's going to happen." Mm-hmm. And I say, "I'm glad you acknowledge that that's right. But I'll tell you this, when he wants to change and starts changing, you're going to find that you want to change and you'll start changing. And when he sees that, he'll want to change more, which will only make you want to change more. And then you'll try to outdo each other in how many changes you make. Not because he's trying to change you, but because you want to change yourself." By the way, one of the things you need to understand is this. Get this straight. You're never less able to change than when somebody's trying to change you. because you are defensive. You have up your fence. You have up your defense. When you don't have to have your defense up anymore, then you can change.
Yeah, what's the best way to, using this same tactic, what's the best way to get somebody to lose weight? You know, if you're married or you're in a relationship.
Well, if, I will speak as a offender, because I have in my lifetime gained weight, lost weight. Never had much trouble losing weight, but I didn't have much trouble gaining it either. I found that there were times when I wanted to do it. When I wanted to do it, I did it easily. When I was being told I needed to lose it, I wasn't very successful at doing it.
Well, I was trying to set you up on that, but didn't go quite the way I wanted. But I was kind of going with lose weight first, and the other person will follow you.
Yeah.
Using that same idea a minute
absolutely.
ago.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Instead of saying, "Hey, you know, your partner, you need to lose weight," that's not going to work.
No.
But if you start losing weight, and then the other person will want to start losing weight, and
That's
vice versa.
very-
You know, if they want you to lose weight, all they have to do is lose weight, and then you go, "Oh, well, gosh, I better lose weight." You know.
Right,
So,
right. That supports the idea I'm never less able to change than when I'm perceiving you to try to change me.
Exactly.
Because I'm defensive.
What do people seem to have the most difficulty with in relationships, and why?
I would have to give a lot of thought to that, but I would tend to probably approach it from the point of view that I made earlier today about communication. Whatever it is that's going on inside us, or if it's a behavior that's something we're doing, communicating about it is, communicating with ourselves, communicating with others. To me, that's very, 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 very important. And number one, finding out exactly what it is, what its implications are, where it comes from, and what we can do about it. So I just think I'd have to probably go to communications on that.
Okay. And what is something that you would like to talk about that we haven't covered that would be important?
I guess I would just say, to those who are viewing, let me encourage you to be who you are and who you were intended to be. Be who you are and the person you were created to be. And if there's tension between those two, good subject for therapy.
All right. Let's see. We probably covered this one, but we could go for it anyway. How could you help people with difficulty in marriage or relationships?
I'm sorry, I didn't get it.
How could you help people with marriage or difficulty in relationships? You know, that we haven't talked about.
One word that everybody knows is the word model. But I really think that word is a far more important word than most of us recognize. When there's something you want to achieve, improve marriage, improve job performance, improve motivation, find yourself a good model of that. Someone who's doing it, and doing it the way you'd like to see it done. And concentrate on learning as much as you can about that model. I think that can have extremely positive effects on you. Having a good model is so terribly important. And my guess is the things that bother you most about you are areas where you've not had a real good model.
What would be one more thing that you could tell people to help them communicate better with each other that we haven't talked about before?
Openness and lack of defensiveness. It's easy to say both. But there's a lot of razor wire mixed in talking about both those things.
Yeah. So you're saying that when we're defensive, we're not hearing what you're saying, what the other person's saying.
Got to defend ourselves.
Because we're forming our defense, right? We're not hearing.
Right. Well, go back to the statement made earlier today. The necessary and sufficient condition for openness is safety. How can I help you? In fact, I often ask people at the end of the first session, did you feel comfortable here today? If you didn't, I want you to tell me. And I usually get the word, felt very comfortable. I said, good, that's exactly the way I want you to feel. That's a synonym for safe. Gotta feel safe.
So in a relationship, if a person doesn't feel safe, how do you resolve that?
Create an atmosphere in which they can and expect to be tested.
It was an honor having Dr. Don Walker with us today. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next video.